Hey guys, taking advantage of a beautiful evening here in the Midwest, following up on some after some client visits this week. Had a free evening here before we get busy with about 4 or 5, I believe, right back to back here, working our way back towards the farm in Kentucky. One of the things that we are always asked, I'm always asked along the way here, we've touched on it a few times, but now that we're getting into the spring of the year here, kind of going into that, hopefully not overlooking your fall plans by starting a good food plot program here going into the spring of the year. We're focused on answering some of these questions pertaining more to the food plots, as far as how did we do that last year, how did I just start out with a farm late in the year, what hurdles I had to jump over. And a couple of those things always come out. I've never stopped long enough to kind of actually write all that down and then bring it to you guys. I mean, obviously, that we closed on the property, I think it was the first couple of days of July by the time the paperwork was done and everything was in and sealed. So what we weren't able to do what we're going to be able to do this year and start out in the spring of the year early here with a good cover crop, such as the summer release program from green cover seeds, as we're going to implement that here in the end of April into May, and then bringing that all the way full circle into the fall and having that good cover crop to work with. We didn't have that availability last year, and I think that'll resonate with some of you here on the channel, that we just don't, we run out of time, right? We buy a farm late, we run out of time. What do you do? One thing to keep in mind, guys, just because when we're touching on this, just because like we've always said, placement is huge. I'm not saying just because it's a hayfield, old abandoned hayfield, what we're going to touch on here and how I did this last year. I'm not just saying run and throw the plot in there. Really go the extra mile to figure out, to make sure that's where that plot needs to be. If it's not, if you have a question, always wait till the following year. Reach out and let's study that ourselves and between us and try to figure out if that's your best option, or the folks that I was able to get to on the farms this year. Make sure them are the right spots before you go in and just start planning that. So I've actually put this on the board here, guys, to kind of break this down. So the question is that always pops up is, should I mow? Should I mow the food plot? Well, my first answer to that is always no. Right away is to stop that progress or that motion, I guess you could say, because it's a huge thing that everybody wants to do. We want to clean those food plot areas up and go right to mowing. Now, if I would have started that last year, because my fields were old hay fields and they looked woolly, if I would have dove right into that and started and mowed it, I wouldn't have had the opportunity, I believe, to have the what success I did have on the food plots last year. I wouldn't have had that opportunity because I wouldn't have had the thatch layer. Yes, the food plots would have been clean. They would have been, free of some debris that I struggled with, stuff like that. But in the long run, I don't, regret any of the decisions that I made by leaving that hay there, because my thoughts were, okay, if I mow this right off the bat in July, heat of the year, and then and it was late. I knew I only had, usually you need that kind of that 90-day growth of some summer release, if you will, to use that in the fall. I didn't have that. So I went into that thinking, okay, I'm going to leave the hay field here, or that old hay, and I had, like I've got in the notes here, guys, I had hay, I had, there was some old vetch in there, there actually was some native clover in there. There's some cedars popping up. There was just a bunch of trash in there that hadn't been, that was old hay field. So when I say old hay fields, I mean hay that hadn't been in production for, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the case was. But I had a bunch of material. That's the way I looked at it. I had a bunch of material. So what I elected to do was this. So let's walk through here. So the answer, the first portion is no, I did not mow that initially. We're going to get to that and how I went about that and why I did that. So let's start off here, guys. I'm going to kind of use this here, then I'll bring this closer to you in the video so you can see this. So we answered the question, did I mow off the bat? No, I did not. And we're going to answer that, why. So I've got written here the 2021 Kentucky plot process, how I broke that down, and how I got to where we are at right now going into the 2022 planting season, and the fails and the successes. So number one, July 12th is actually when I look back at some of my photos and stuff. July 12th, when I was at the farm, I actually took a pH test. I carry a little pH test with me that's just a color pH test that just is a quick reference to have. You can buy them at most Ace Hardwares. I got mine from Morgan's Composting years ago. You actually crack the dye, the capsule, and put that in water, put some of the soil in the water with it, shake it up, let it sit for X amount of time. It gives you kind of an average, and mine was about 5.5 is what I collected some and took some from the different plots, the areas that I knew I was going to plant, and that's what I came up with, an average about 5.5. So I knew had some work to do. We're shooting for 7 on some fall brassicas. I like that 7 and pH. So I knew I had some work to do. But the decision that I made was this: I didn't feel like I had time to put the lime on there to correct the pH because of my timing. I knew that the lime, if I would have put it on there, it needs time to work in the soil to really saturate and get down in there. It didn't look like there was any rain in the immediate forecast, so I had some decisions to make. So I elected to go with the fertilizer. And I've got here, guys, I left a blank, and that was a organic fertilizer from Southern States, out of Harrodsburg. They're out of Kentucky, and I need to refresh my memory. There's a certain name to it, and it was, I believe, it was like a 1648 or a 1684, something like that, fertilizer. But it was organic. It was a dry manure-based fertilizer, and I told them I wanted that because of my experiences that I had had with using Morgan's Composting stuff down up in Michigan, where I was originally from, that I had good luck with it. I wanted that dry manure, more organic, not triple 19. Why not triple 19, triple 10, triple 12? And the reason for that, guys, is I don't use that because it's a salt based fertilizer. Some time ago, I probably should do another one of those, but I actually put that in a bottle of water, shook it up. That salt fertilizer, you could hand it to somebody and they would drink it as water. I obviously don't recommend doing that, but I mean, that's what it looks like. There's nothing there. It saturates away. Now the organic, more of a manure base, you shake that up, and you obviously wouldn't drink that because it looks like coffee. It all silts to the bottom, and it discolors the water. The water stays like that, discolored for months on end. It never goes away. That's the reason that I use that. I'm not a fan of the salt-based fertilizers at all. So that's what that was. That's what I used. I spread 400 pounds of that per acre on the plots. I've got 6. This year we've got about 7 acres of plots, and that's what I put on there, 400 pounds per acre. So that was on the 15th. So that was only 3 days later. What I did July 15th and 16th, right after that, knowing good and full well, but I had a chance of rain, like the 16th, 17th, right in there, and then I was off to client trips, and I knew I had a short window and had to get it done. So what we did is I broadcast the buckwheat at about 40 pounds per acre, and in with the sorghum Sudan grass at about 30 to 40 pounds per acre as well. I put that together, and you can see me in the video mixing that up, and then I broadcast that right into that standing old hay and thatch, and it had some thatch, obviously a bunch of weeds. It had some ragweed in there even. It had clover, brush, native grasses, parts of cedar. I mean, it had everything in there, right? Just hadn't been maintained. Even some old Johnson grass and stuff in there. So I broadcast that with the ATV and the spreader right on the back. I went around, or the side-by-side, and I spread that right in there in the plots, and then all the plots were planted, and then I came back and I took that crimper that I made, had made, and put that thatch layer, all of that, right down on top of that seed that we planted. We just rolled it right down on top of it, and a couple of them, I could tell it was, there was just so much of it, guys. It was, what I had to work with, but there was some of it I felt, okay, maybe this is too much. You know, obviously I didn't spray. There was none of that involved. I just laid it down. I just rolled it. So some of them I actually crimped it twice. You know, most of it I just crimped once, but I did hit some of it twice. So number 4, and then so that was you know, the middle of July, and I finished it in the rain, and I thought, you know what, did get the rain. It was just a light rain. Looking back at some pictures last year, and I finished it in the rain, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be stellar. This is perfect. I left on client trips. Well, guess what? It didn't rain a lot after that. That wasn't the big drought, but it didn't rain a lot after that. So that was the middle of July. Middle of August comes, so about 30 days later, I got back from client trips, and I put my fall blend, which was the purple top turnips, Eco-Till radish, Austrian winter peas, and I had red clover. It averaged, I did a blend there, and it was about 50 pounds per acre is what it ended up being. I put that right into just a blend of my own. Did the, you know, like, you know, 10 pounds of the turnips, the Eco-Till, 8 to 12 pounds of the Eco-Till radish. I had it all mixed in. It was about 50 pounds per acre total is what it was, all together. I went across all the food plots, and I planted that into that. You know, some of that was the buckwheat was starting to grow. Wasn't very tall, but you know, some of the hay had stood back up just a little bit. Went back in there, broadcast that in, and then I crimped it again. And there wasn't a lot, you know, just wasn't a lot standing, but some of the hay had lifted, stuff like that. I crimped it down again, guys, and that, so I covered I think the majority of what happened is I kind of shook that thatch, and a bunch of the seeds fell through, and I crimped again, and it looked good. It did crimp pretty well. I was pretty shocked on what it, you know, what that crimper did in pretty much junk, right? In not good cover crop, not what we want to plant as cover crop. So I planted it, and 28 days, I left again on client trips. 28 days, 0 rain. So that would have been about September 15th, somewhere in there. Got back from client trips. We actually, the season had started in Kentucky, and we had got 28 days of rain, or 28 days of a drought. So what I did is I elected to I had to make a decision. So what I did, guys, is I looked out in the plots area there, and some of that thatch was actually starting to stand up because, you know, it had just the old hay, you know, some of the stuff that didn't crimp real well, because it's not that product that we're looking at really just cracking right over, you know, and killing it. It's just real, you know, pliable, if you will. Started to stand up. The plot looked kind of jagged, you know, so. And I'll tell you what happened, and I didn't do this intentionally, but this is what happened. I elected to mow it. The brassicas were just about, they were about 2-3 inches tall, the ones that were coming along, and actually I was pretty shocked because of the drought of what grew. It looked pretty good. And so I had my neighbor come over. He's got an 18-foot batwing mower on it behind his New Holland tractor there. And what I had him do is he, you know, winged it out. And what we did is he started mowing, and the first time that he went around, of course I told him, I don't, you know, we can't hit the brassicas, we got to be just above the brassicas. So we started at about 8 inches, and then that was a little bit long. I dropped it down, it was about 6 inches, so it was about 2 inches or so over top of the brassicas. So he made the first turn there, and I was watching behind, and I remember filming it, and I thought to myself, wow. So we mowed this at a very slow, at a 540 RPM off the PTO, slower, and at a slower RPM as well, just and a slow speed, trying to, you know, set the pace on how this was going to work. My whole goal was just to make the plot look a little more dressed, you know, and all that stuff. My idea was all that stuff that was standing up, we were just going to cut it off. I wasn't looking to grind all of this, you know, I was just looking to to kind of make it flush on the top, and to just cut that off and let whatever that was, whether it was 6 inches, a foot, 2 foot tall, whatever it was, just kind of cut it and lay it down. And that goes back to the days when I was, you know, a test plot of weed whipping it or sickle bar mowing it and stuff like that. I just wanted to lay it down, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, there was pieces that were 6, 8, 10 inches long, so it was working great. it just laid it down. Well, as he's mowing, he goes around the second time, we lowered it down just a little bit, and I was watching him, and all of a sudden it caught my eye. What was happening is the thatch layer of the crimped down, that nasty debris, that old hay. As he was going, I could see the thatch layer lifting, and he was obviously cutting the top of it, but all that stuff that I had crimped down, it was just floating. It had just, actually just aerated it. It just picked it up just a little bit, and I thought, boy, that might be just the ticket that I needed for this to really kick off. Now, if I can only get some rain, if it, let's say it was too thick, it just kind of lifted it, and that wasn't the purpose, but that's what happened, and it cleaned it off, and it lifted that up, guys. You could then, it was just like it kind of fluffed it, if you will, and it worked stellar. It really worked great. So we got some good rain right after that, and during that time, what I did, still about the 15th, 16th, is what I did, guys, is I ended up, I knew that the plots needed some help, obviously, because of the drought that had hit us, and so I elected to, I put 150 pounds of rye, cereal rye, and winter wheat, 150 pounds, of each, so 300 pounds total. I put that right on the plots over the whole thing. Yes, it was on the brassicas, but at that point I wanted to try to salvage it, knowing that going into this year I could use that rye here shortly here in the spring. So I planted 150 pounds of rye, 150 pounds per acre of oats, or of the winter wheat, and we ran with that. It started, that wheat, the winter wheat and the rye, because of that, that thatch layer had lifted a little bit, the brassicas exploded, took off, and the rye and the wheat looked great. Going into September, I'll show you some videos here. It really looked good. Not a lot of, I had a lot of top, but it never really created a big bulb. My Eco-Till radish did, I've got some pictures of that. There was some of that, and that was, kind of bust that hard soil apart down there. So all in all, I was pretty impressed on what had worked. So I followed that up the middle of October, so now we're like 30 days later, and I went back in October 15th, and I broadcast another 250 pounds. I jumped it by 100 pounds per acre of just the rye, the cereal rye. Went back in there and put 250 pounds per acre of the rye on all 6 acres there, and really dosed it good with the rye. So I did mow it once. It was just to clean it up. It ended up lifting that thatch layer, like I said, guys, and it aerated it. And so at this point, one mowing, 0 chemicals, and that's what the plots look like today. There's one plot that I wasn't able to, and we call it the no man's land. It's an area that is just, it's real narrow, long plot, and it's the smallest plot on the farm, and I just can't get that big mower in there this year. I'm actually going to go in because there's a bunch of this cedar and just stemmy, there's actually some dogwood that's out there, and it just kind of looks trashy. I'm going to knock that down. I'm going to mow that on top of it the same way we're doing here, before that cover crop gets good and tall, so I don't chew any of that up. But just to clean that up, I mean, I might even do it with a weed whip, but it's there's not a lot of it there, but just to lay that stuff down, hand cut it out of there, whatever the case is. But the rest of it was all done with no chemical, and only one mowing right now. I don't have the intentions of mowing it again. So here's the answer to that, is should you mow? I was telling a client this the other day, if I would have bought that, let's say in April or May, would I have mowed it, knowing that I had a chance to get rid of that stuff without chemicals, get rid of it, and then plant the summer release onto it in April or May, and have a good, all of May, all of June, all of July, so 3 months, 90 days of good full growing on that, with that summer release, going into having something really good to crimp down on my brassicas. Maybe I probably would have mowed it at that time to start those plots, set that trash back. I probably would have. So to answer the questions, if you have one of these right now, gauge that. Are you going to have time to plant a summer release in there? You could use chemicals. set that back and or mow it, plant the summer release in there, fertilize. So to answer that, guys, it's always take the soil samples early. What I'd always recommend my clients is you go 100% with your fertilizer recommendations the first year. The second year, go 50% of what they recommend. The third year, you probably won't have to use it at all. That's the power of this green manure release through the summer release program that we're pushing and trying to get everybody to follow along with here, guys, is because I'm trying to help the non-farmer, the more food plot guys, the hunting, the hunter out here that doesn't have the time, the funds, or the equipment to do this stuff. This is what we're trying to promote this and trying to help everybody, gain, is that less cost as far as the fertilizer and the lime. Now, there's probably some ag guys watching this that are farmers and deer hunters, and I know maybe, there's multiple different ways to do this, but the majority of the people that I work with, this fits and this has helped, and my clients are striving on this, and it's really helped their program. So one of the questions I'll ask, and I'm going to do a separate video on this too, guys, but one of the questions that will tie into this that I'll answer here, like I said, why not just straight buckwheat? Well, straight buckwheat is something that's being pushed out there right now, and it works, don't get me wrong, but what I have found is I started more researching the blend side of it because I had 2 years back to back where it was a dry year, and maybe that was just my timing, maybe that was bad luck, whatever it might be, that the deer destroyed my buckwheat plots. And I think what that is now looking back and doing some research on it, guys, and we'll touch on this in a separate video, but what I feel it really was is that buckwheat is so high in moisture content. When I finally kicked it off and got it going, and I was in some pretty good soil, both of those tests, and it really grew, but it was so dry. I had a bunch of water sources had dried up. That was before my water hole implementation. So the deer ate it to reach their I feel that they were eating it to help reach their moisture intake, their water goals, and they destroyed it. Well, if they destroy a straight product and you don't have something there such as the summer release to that they're not eating completely gone, there's very slim chance that they're going to eat all of the products in a blend. Now a straight planting like buckwheat, they destroyed it. I had nothing left to use as a cover crop. I ended up piling a bunch of rye on there, and some of it worked, some of it didn't, but that's why I use the summer release program now, guys, going into this year. We're going to have a full system of it to show you on what it's going to do on the farm for us. And if I took old hay ground last year and used that heavy thatch and just nasty debris, and it was kind of too heavy, I think my saving grace was when I mowed it, guys. Like I said, that wasn't my intentions, but that's what happened. You could stand behind the mower, like I said, you could see that thatch layer because the vacuum effect that it was doing. It just lifted that up, and as soon as it lifted it up, within days, obviously we got some rain to help the situation out too, but within days after that, I could tell a huge difference in the plot. So I'm not saying don't mow, I'm just saying make sure that you look at your situation and maybe use this as an example. If you were late, if you are late going into this year, or if you're finding this video about July like I was, maybe this will help you, and you can at least salvage or experience somewhat of a good plot to get you started. And then this whole program, when it says the 2022 Kentucky planning progress, when we touch on this next year, is going to look a lot different than this, because we're going to have that full 90 days of the growing behind the summer release, and then put our fall brassicas into it, guys. So I just wanted to bring this to you. I haven't ever had a time and to really go through and stop and do this. And good evening out here. Got taken care of with some clients today. Had a revisit actually yesterday that we stopped on a client that I did quite some time ago, and had the time to bring this to you guys. So if you have any questions, feel free to add the questions in the comments below, and maybe even like and share this one if you will. Kind of a lengthy video, but this is what maybe this can help someone going into your planting season to kind of get you to where you need to be, such as we are this year in a full food plot program. Thanks, guys.